This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and it is smackdown time. We have the Asus ZenBook Pro UX 501 15.6-inch gamer/lightweight productivity machine, and we have the MSI GS60 Ghost Pro. Definite gaming machine right here, but even lighter, also 15.6-inch display, and we're going to smack them down. And we're also going to talk about the HP Omen 15, the Acer Nitro series, a couple of other thin, relatively speaking, light, possible gamer, possible productivity, 15-inch machines that compete in this area. So stay tuned, we're going to compare them now. So here we have two 5-pound or less, 15.6-inch thin and light laptops that can be mobile gaming machines, pro apps machines as the phrase goes these days. That means for those of you who use, say, Adobe CC, Photoshop, Premiere Pro, video editing, those sorts of things, even some CAD 3D design kind of work. 15.6 inches, like I said, and obviously one of them has a glossy display, the one that's acting like a really annoying mirror right here, and one of them has a matte display. The Asus actually has a 4K display. That is the only way that it's available in the United States right now, and it is $14.99, call it $1,500. The MSI GS60 Ghost Pro right here has a 1080p matte display. It's also available with a 3K, which is 2K technically speaking. It's also available with a 3K display or a 4K display, and the price will range anywhere from around $1,500 for the 1080p model all the way up to around $1,900. So it's a bit more expensive if you're comparing resolution to resolution there. Now we hear that Asus may release a 1080p model for the United States. They haven't yet, but some of you folks overseas may have one available. Both of these are very slim looking. Both of these have metal casing, though with the MSI you might be hard pressed to tell because you might think, well, that could be faux metal plastic, but this is brushed aluminum. The keyboard deck also is. The bottom cover and the bezel are plastic on this. It's nice looking, it's understated, it's probably not as gee whiz golly good looking as the Asus ZenBook Pro. I think most people are probably going to like this look better here with the swirl aluminum lid, metal panels everywhere. Both of these are fairly rigid, by the way. A little bit more of a curvy taper going on with the MSI, and with the Asus, unlike the 13-inch ZenBooks that taper to a really fine point, this one stays thicker on the sides because, well, there's a lot of componentry that has to go inside this thing and a very big battery. So there's our side profile there. Now this guy weighs 5 pounds and it has a 6-cell battery inside. In some regions it may be available with a 4-cell battery where it would weigh a little bit less. The MSI, here's what it looks like from the side. MSI does their own thing in terms of looks, I have to say. It's unique looking. Doesn't taper a whole lot in the front either. 4.2 pounds. This thing is crazy light. What makes a 15-inch MacBook Pro Retina display seem heavy? You know, well, this does. It's quite the engineering marvel. Does not have as huge a battery inside. We'll get into battery life later. From the bottom view, there's the panel there with the ventilation. You've got a bunch of Phillips head screws holding the bottom panel on. But this one, it's pretty easy to take the bottom panel off. You have access to the physical hard drive, HDD, 1 terabyte of storage. There's also 2 SSDs in RAID configuration, PCIe connector, but SATA interface because it's doing the RAID thing. And there's 2 RAM slots inside. However, they're on the flip side of the motherboard. It takes a lot of disassembly to get to those. Wireless card, of course, is socketed. Once you take the bottom off, you have access to the battery. With our Asus model right here, you're going to have to use Torx screwdriver to get the screws on. There's like 10 screws, plus you have to take off 1 set of rubber feet to get there. Now, once you do that, you have access to the PCIe SSD in here. This has the fastest SSD. It's X4 PCIe. There's 1 RAM slot. 8 gigs of RAM is soldered on board, and there's 1 RAM slot. And the wireless card is socketed. There is no hard drive slot for a 2.5-inch hard drive. So the MSI is more true to this typical gaming kind of setup where you want to have a big drive to install all your games, but a fast SSD for boot and for Windows loading speed times. Both of these run on Intel quad-core CPUs. That's the higher wattage model. These are not Ultrabook CPUs in here. They're the ones that are meant for more powerful machines. Asus stuck with the 4th generation. Now, MSI has recently introduced 5th generation, which is pretty rare. Not many companies have even bothered because it took so long for Intel 5th generation CPUs to come out in quad-core for laptops. Well, is there much of a difference between them? No. The integrated graphics is a little bit quicker, but since these have dedicated graphics, that's really what most people care about. Clock speed on these is around 2.5, 2.6 gigahertz. You're looking at roughly the same performance in terms of your CPU. And the integrated graphics, again, alongside. Now, what is important here is the dedicated graphics. So, ASUS went a little bit more mainstream. And again, this is also available pretty much the same thing as the Republic of Gamers or ROG G501. This has the NVIDIA GTX 960M with 2 or 4 gigs of DDR5 VRAM. Ours has 2 gigs. This is the one and only build, really, that's available in the United States. MSI, with their Ghost Pro series, goes with the GTX 970M. And the amount of VRAM varies anywhere from 2 up to 6 gigs, depending on the configuration you're getting. Now, that little jump in series number is actually very significant. And when I tell you about the benchmark numbers, you'll see what I'm talking about there. So the 960 is still a strong performer, and it's at the bottom rung of the high-performance graphics processors. It's still good enough to handle today's most demanding games on medium settings, sometimes even high. But you'll see it used a little bit more on those kind of multi-purpose machines, like the HP Omen 15, which also wants to be your pro apps kind of, sometimes cool gamer also thing. And when you got the 970M or even the 980M on some bigger machines, you won't find anything this thin and light. That's for pretty hardcore gaming and a lot more future-proofing going on inside. So you'll see much better graphics performance and numbers here. So how about benchmarks? Obviously the big number here is going to be the graphics difference because we have the 960M versus the 970M. Now this is still the 4th generation quad-core Intel CPU. It's not the 5th generation. So we're comparing pretty much apples to apples here in terms of CPU. So for 3D Mark 11, the MSI scored in performance mode at 9,112. It actually kicked the plants off of my gaming desktop, which is 2 years old. Wow. In comparison, the ASUS scored 3,224. So you're looking at almost 3 times the speed in that test for our MSI GS60 Ghost Pro. PC Mark 7, which kind of measures all around stuff, 6,006 for the MSI, 6,115 for the ASUS. So it actually scores a little bit higher on this because it's got 100 megahertz faster clock speed, and it's got that wickedly fast PCIe X4 SSD inside. Now our MSI is configured with the 128 gig boot SSD, by the way, and a 1 terabyte hard drive that's 7200 RPM. So that one can drop speeds a little bit in terms of synthetic benchmarks if the synthetic benchmark actually looks at that drive at all. Since it's not the boot drive, usually it won't too much. PC Mark 8 Home Accelerated for the MSI, 3,929 versus 3,050 for the ASUS ZenBook Pro. W Prime, call it even. They both compute Pi about equally as fast, and that's a good indicator of computational prowess. Firestrike, that's a 3D Mark test at 1080p. 6508 is our score for the MSI versus 3923 for the ASUS. So you get the idea. MSI is the winner when it comes to graphics performance. If you're looking at the computational aspect of this, they're both pretty much identical. When you look at the storage speed, you have the RAID 0 option here for the SSD. That's going to speed things up a bit versus the very fast PCIe X4 SSD in this. You're going to have faster storage in the ASUS. Can you tell the difference using it day to day? I don't know. Probably not so much. Maybe when you're installing software. They're both very fast storage solutions. When it comes to ports on these, you have 3 USB 3.0 ports on our ZenBook Pro, the SD card slot, the usual headphone jack. And on the other side, full-size HDMI, that's the other of the 3 USB ports, mini display port, and that's it. Now, dongle adapter available if you need Ethernet, and you can use an adapter to go to VGA from DisplayPort if you want, but not built in. The MSI is pretty impressive, the amount of ports that they get in this. We actually have gigabit Ethernet built in. Sweet. No dongle adapter needed. The mini display port right there, the full-size HDMI, the SD card slot, there's a USB 3.0 port over there. 2 more, so they both have 3 USB 3.0 ports. That's a lock slot, charging port, and separate mic and headphone jacks, handy for some gaming headsets that still have separate lines for each. Both of these have twin fan cooling designs, one for the dedicated graphics, one for the CPU inside. Both of these companies make gaming motherboards, gaming desktop components, and laptops, and they both know how to do it and to keep the machines cool. So despite the fact that these are very slim and relatively light, they handle the graphics power inside well, even when gaming. Now, the Asus seems to be throttling in firmware. Once it reaches 85 degrees centigrade, it's really not going to go above your base clock rates. It's not going to turbo boost so much. MSI has a little bit more headroom there, and neither of these gets burning hot. Now, that the plastic on the underside does help with that here, because plastic doesn't just get as burning hot as metal, but both of these manage well. I will say that the MSI's base fan level, no matter what you're doing, even if it's just productivity, Word, or streaming a video, which is not something difficult for this machine to do, you'll hear the fan. It's a little bit louder. It's not obnoxious, but if you're used to an Ultrabook, which tends to run really quiet, you're going to notice it. The ZenBook, the fan's always on with that one too, but you might hear it a little bit less. Now, both of these are going to be pretty loud if you are playing games, because they have to keep the hardware inside cool, and there's not a lot of room for heat dissipation. So unlike big old Alienwares or the very large size counterparts that exist in the 17-inch arena, say for gaming laptops, these guys will be noisier. That's just a fact of life. Now, how about the other 15-inch thin and relatively speaking light gaming / pro apps laptops on the market? There's the HP Omen 15 that we reviewed. That one has a kind of out there design. I think it looks pretty darn cool, but it is very angular. It looks like nothing else. It's up to you as to how you feel about taking that to work. You could either say it looks industrial cool, or it looks too boy racer. That one starts around $1,500, $1,600 as well. So that puts it with the Asus in terms of price range. But it doesn't have a 4K display. There is no 4K option for those of you who feel you really have to have that. We'll talk about the caveats with 4K in a bit. Also, the Omen has 8 gigs of RAM, and going up to 16 gigs is kind of expensive with HP for some reason. I would say try to do it yourself if you can. The one RAM slot that's in there, that also has the updated version, has the 960M graphics inside. So the Asus is still at the lower end, certainly for what you're getting for your money in terms of price. The MSI being mid to high end. There's also the Razer Blade. And that one is definitely, it's cool looking, a little bit, you know, I'm a gamer definitely, but that one is going to be the most expensive option out there. And then, of course, Acer has their V Nitro machines, which are pretty darn affordable. Generally speaking, when equipped like the Asus, not quite as inexpensive, but they're another option to consider. We haven't reviewed one of those yet, but we are looking forward to doing so. Now, taking a look inside, both of these have number pads, handy for gamers and for you number crunchers as well. Similar sized trackpads. Neither of these is one of my top favorite trackpads, but I would actually give Asus the edge with their Elan trackpad here. The MSI just has a really not good trackpad. Get a mouse. Definitely get a mouse if you're going to be using that one. Now, when it comes to the keyboard, both of these are backlit keyboards. The Asus, just your normal white multi-stage backlighting. The MSI, with its gaming heritage, has multi-zone colored backlighting. You can configure that as you see fit. And even the power button, when it's blue like it is right now, that means it's running on integrated graphics. When it changes to red, it means it's using dedicated graphics. So you can tell when NVIDIA Optimus is switching. Of course, if you wish to manually control that, you can, but otherwise it's just going to automatically switch. This is a SteelSeries keyboard. It is one of the dreamiest keyboards to type on. I have to say it does have the better keyboard. It's also certainly great for gaming, which is what SteelSeries is about. But in terms of tactile feel, key damping, travel, and the uniformity of key resistance throughout the keyboard, it is the nicer keyboard. Now, the Asus one isn't bad at all. It takes a little bit of a firmer touch. 1.6 millimeter to travel, so it's not bad on the travel. Just a little bit, well, feels a little bit more Ultrabooky. If you use an Ultrabook, you know what that means. It's just a little firmer. When we get to the display here, I think the matte option is really something that gamers like a whole lot. That is a non-touch display. All of the MSI GS60 Ghost Pro models are still non-touch. If you go for the 3K or the 4K, they will have glossy displays. Our 4K and 4K only display obviously is glossy, and it supports touch. So for those of you who really like touch for use with Windows 8 and even the upcoming Windows 10, of course, both of these will be upgradable for free. Well, there you have it. If touch is a must, it's ASUS. Now, when it comes to 4K, here's the thing, and if you watch my review of this, you know this already. It's great if you're doing video editing and photo editing. You'll get very detailed views of your photos. If you're doing 4K video editing, you can actually see it in 4K on the display. If you're doing 1080p, you have enough room for all of your palettes and stuff around here. Of course, Windows is not the best at handling, I shouldn't say Windows. Windows applications are not all the best at handling scaling. You'll still get teeny dialog boxes, sometimes control elements around your application that are really kind of too small to see with the 4K display. Not ASUS's fault, that's just the state of the world, and as third-party programs actually get up to speed with handling display scaling better, that'll be less of a problem. But again, if you watched my gaming video of this machine of the ASUS, you saw just how even Origin, okay, Origin is never the class leader in anything when it comes to gaming. In my opinion, we know, we like to make fun of Origin, but their little window comes up, even if with the desktop scaling set to 200%, it doesn't respect it. You get this teeny little postage stamp right there, and there you are trying to see what's on the store, trying to look at your games. Doesn't scale well. Also, a lot of games these days, well, even if you have the display set to 1920 by 1080, which used to be a good way of fooling games into just running at 1080p for better performance, the games now directly address the display, and they know, you got a 4K display. So they're all going to basically use it as a 4K display. Now, you can still choose your resolution within the game, but you're going to take a performance hit in games. If gaming is primarily your thing, go with the MSI Ghost Pro with the 1080p display. There's also, if you're interested, in the HP Omen 15, again, 1080p display, and that one has a glossy touchscreen for those of you who are looking for touch. If you really want 4K for your pro apps, again, for your video and your image editing, more power to you. Both of these are available with 4K displays. Again, you're only going to get touch over here. The color calibration on the 1080p model is very good. That's good enough, honestly, and the colors and the color gamut are good enough for professional work, for photo editing. The ASUS, even with calibration, not so much. It never gets where it quite needs to be, unfortunately, for really accurate photo editing. Now with MSI, they use a couple of different panel manufacturers there and panel models. It's a bit harder to say with them what you're going to get with the 4K display in terms of color accuracy, but so far they've tested a little bit better for the review units that I've seen. In terms of brightness, both of these are fairly bright. This is just under 300 nits of brightness. The MSI is crazy bright at 344 nits. It might seem brighter because there's no glare also. Now if you're going up to the 3K or the 4K, the brightness is going to go down to around 300 nits as well, so you're looking at similar stuff right there. In terms of usable screen real estate, because we have scaling set to 200% on the 4K display here, you're looking at pretty much roughly the same size as 1080p running at 100%. You'd have to be really eagle-eyed, certainly, to try to run this at 150% scaling, and it is pretty much impossible at 100% scaling. In terms of other goodies, speakers. With the MSI, you get a set of famously pretty good speakers there. The Dyna Audio really works. Speakers fire up. They are quite loud. They are very full and rich. I actually use this when I use the exercise bike, and it's loud enough to overcome the sound of the exercise machine, and it sounds pretty loud and full. It's very enjoyable. The audio on the ZenBook, like most ZenBooks, is kind of thin and not as loud, a little bit more grating. I would use external speakers with this under the same circumstances, to be honest. Both of these have dual band Wi-Fi AC. For some reason, ASUS went with the older Intel 7260 AC adapter, which was not a high point of Intel engineering. Usually they make some of the best wireless adapters out there, and it's a little bit flakier. It tends to drop connections every once in a while. Drivers have improved over time, but I much prefer the killer, which is a Qualcomm Atheros product, Wi-Fi that is in the MSI. It's not a deal breaker. It's not the end of the world. You get Bluetooth 4.0 in both of these. Battery life, here's where the ASUS pulls ahead. You'll find that the gaming thin and light laptops, the ones that are really geared more towards gaming than anything else, really the focus of engineering is not on battery life. So 3.5 hours for the MSI GS60 Ghost Pro, and that's with brightness set to 50% on both of these, and balanced power management set. Now you got a whole bunch of different power management scenarios with the MSI for gaming and all that sort of stuff. So we're just talking about the productivity settings. The Asus averages about 4.5, so you get about an hour more using the same, again, balance mode, 50% brightness, and avoiding using apps that use dedicated graphics. Now, obviously, both of these will switch into dedicated graphics every once in a while, or the battery life should, in theory, be even better. Look at the Dell XPS 15, for example. That one's, among PCs, some of the best battery life. Of course, it's also running a 2-generation-old NVIDIA 750M graphics adapters. So, well, that's part of the reason why it's going to get better battery life. Anyway, battery life's important to you. Neither of these is going to be great, but this will do better. The HP Omen, likewise, again, has the 960M. It doesn't have the 970M. It's geared a little bit more towards people who might just want to be doing graphics arts productivity stuff. It, too, will last longer than the MSI. The Razer Blade, they try to improve graphics there, but it's still not a stunning machine in terms of battery life either. Obviously, these both, to a certain extent, target the same audience. Again, a little bit more gamer heavy, or I need the most horsepower and the most graphics horsepower possible for the MSI. But the Asus really gives you a lot of value for your money. You got to say, it's about the cheapest you're going to find out there at $1,500, and for that you get that really classy casing. You get one of the fastest and ample size 512 gig SSDs in there and a 4K display. It might not be the best in terms of color gamut, contrast, black levels, all that sort of thing, but it's not bad. For those of you who are not doing professional photo or video editing, this would not be my choice for that, this display, if you could afford something more expensive. If you're looking for the all-out in horsepower, future-proofedness, the multi-zone color backlit keyboard, the better speakers, then there's a reason why the MSI costs more. You're getting all those things. You're getting everything except for great battery life. That is where the MSI GS60 Ghost Pro really falls down. So that's the Asus ZenBook Pro UX501 versus the MSI GS60 Ghost Pro. And like I said, there's some other machines to consider. In fact, the HP Omen 15 is really the one that competes even more directly in terms of price and also graphics capabilities. But as you can see, the MSI, just like the Razer Blade, also really designed for gaming, and you got some pretty serious killer graphics in here. And the Asus, even though it's also sold with very little difference as the Republic of Gamer G501, is good for gaming, but really obviously designed more for an all-around kind of productivity machine. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to watch our video review of each of these products and hit that like button.